Good morning. I hope everyone can hear me. We were just giving people a minute or two to sign in. Welcome to this webinar, which is one of a series of webinars that we here at the Alberta Centre for Sustainable Rural Communities, or the ACSRC, is happy to be presenting rural economic community development in post-pandemic Alberta. My name is Clark Banack. I'm the acting director of the ACSRC. We're located at the Augustana campus of the University of Alberta in Camrose. And for those of you who, this might be your first ACSRC event, you're a little bit unfamiliar with us. Very briefly, our mission as a research center is essentially to harness the research and educational capacity of the U of A in support of sustainable rural communities and organizations across Alberta. Before we go any further, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Today, I am very happy to have Kyle White with us to deliver a talk entitled "Old Solutions for New Problems: Why Alberta's Small Towns Need to Consider Cooperatives." Before I introduce Kyle and turn it over to him, I do want to make two quick housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded. Only those speaking, will be visible. No one from the audience will be part of the recording. So, I apologize if you put on your best shirt today, hoping for a bit of screen time. You're not going to get it here anyway. The recording will be posted on our website in due course. At the end of this event, I will make sure you have the link to our website to find that. You'll probably also receive a link in a follow-up email from us after this event. And finally, as most of you know by now, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a little Q&A button. At any point throughout this presentation, you are welcome to click on that little button and enter a question that you may have for Kyle. Those questions will only be seen by myself and Kyle. They will not be, they won't appear publicly on the webinar screen. At the end of our event, we are planning to have a few minutes for Q&A. So I will do my best at the end to take questions from those that submitted and submit as many as I can, pose as many as I can to Kyle. So without further ado, let me introduce Kyle White, the Governance and Education Lead with Cooperatives First. Kyle's work focuses on developing and delivering educational and development services for Cooperatives First. Originally from Newfoundland and Labrador, Kyle has worked his way across Canada, focusing on community economic development in rural and Indigenous communities. With degrees in geography and public policy, Kyle's educational background has focused on community development, governance, and organizational policy. Aside from his work with Cooperatives First, Kyle is an active volunteer with several Saskatoon-based nonprofits and serves on a variety of boards. Please welcome Kyle White.
Thanks, Clark, and good morning, everybody. I'll just share my screen with you guys. I'll share my screen and then load my PowerPoint. So, 1 second. There we go. All right. I hope everyone can see that okay. Hopefully, not an image that we see too often anymore. Or at least I hope not. Very cool. Well, thank you, Clark, for the lovely introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining this morning. I'm really excited to share this presentation with you guys and get into some good questions and discussion afterwards. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from my home in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is located on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. And before I get into the meat of my presentation today, just wanted to give a quick overview for folks who might not be familiar with Cooperatives First. Cooperatives First is a Saskatoon-based nonprofit. Although we're based in Saskatoon, we work all across Western Canada, primarily with rural and Indigenous communities. And our organization is mandated to raise awareness of cooperatives and provide support for groups that are interested in developing new cooperatives. And we do this by providing online courses, workshops, and tools and resources to help entrepreneurs start new cooperative businesses. Our organization is funded by Federated Cooperatives Limited on behalf of the cooperative retailing system, and that allows us to do all this work at no cost to the groups we work with. And to date, we've worked with, I think, well over 100, 150 groups and have helped start nearly 50 new co-ops, some of which I'll talk a little bit about later. And just to give you a quick overview of what we'll be talking about in this presentation, we'll start by looking at some of the challenges that are currently facing small towns. Certainly, this is true for towns in Alberta, but I think this is applicable for probably small towns in the rest of Canada. We'll then talk about how the pandemic impacted or accelerated some of those challenges and what the landscape might look like as we come out of the pandemic. We'll touch on how Alberta small towns have dealt with challenges not dissimilar to this in the past and what lessons we can maybe extract from that. And we'll finish by looking at some new opportunities for how small towns are organizing to grow, survive, and thrive. So let's start with the negative stuff, I guess. Some of the challenges facing small towns and rural communities. I probably don't need to get too deeply into this because I think a lot of these challenges have been talked about for a long time. If we live in small towns, we're probably familiar with these challenges. And for decades, we've seen things like urbanization, drawing people, especially young people, away from small towns with the prospects of education, jobs, and additional opportunities. And this has led to really overall population decline. And we're seeing real big challenges emerge, especially as the baby boomer generation approaches retirement. They're maybe looking at selling businesses that they might own in the community. They're looking for things like seniors services or different forms of housing. Younger people are looking for childcare. Communities are just in a different place. And many small towns don't necessarily have the services or the conditions that entrepreneurs and younger people are looking for at the moment. And that's creating a bit of a problem, especially if no one's willing to move into the community and buy these businesses. A lot of communities are at risk of losing important services. And that would leave some serious gaps. Some of the communities that we'll talk about are at risk of losing things like their only meat processing facility, their only childcare center, important services that are essential for communities to survive and thrive. But that has ripple effects. With those gaps in services, communities have a really difficult time attracting new people and new businesses into their community. If there's gaps and fewer people, there's just fewer opportunities for people to set up shop in those communities. And if those trends continue, what will business retention look like? Will communities continue to lose more businesses, more services, and more people as a result? Now, this certainly isn't widespread, but I think this sort of challenge is definitely evident in many of the communities we visited, the communities we've had a chance to work with throughout Western Canada, and certainly some of the communities we've worked with in Alberta. So what impact did the COVID-19 pandemic have? Well, when we look at things over the past year, and I mean, we're still certainly in the thick of it, although maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel, we're seeing some of these challenges really get accelerated. Things like online shopping have really ramped up. There's been issues with businesses having to close due to certain restrictions. There's been issues getting a good workforce in place. Challenges that make it incredibly difficult to run a business. And of course, as a result, we've seen many businesses close, unfortunately. At the same time, though, we've seen a tremendous influx of government spending and support through programs like uh, the CERB, SEBA, or CEWS, the employee wage subsidy. We've seen a real tremendous investment to try and help people get through this difficult time. Of course, we know that that's come with a pretty significant price tag. And while all that's happening, we see some other things, some other trends happening that maybe are a positive if we can capitalize on it. We see a real appreciation for local. Although there's lots of online shopping happening, and Amazon is doing, record numbers these days, we do see a big concerted effort to try and support small local businesses to help them through the pandemic and help them survive and grow. And certainly with the shift to remote work and many people across the country working from home, we're seeing a real appreciation for small towns. A lot of people, certainly folks in my generation, the millennials, are taking a look at their cost of living in these big urban cities, where it's certainly, if you're in Toronto or Vancouver, it's much more difficult with the cost of living there. And they're saying, I don't think we necessarily need to live in these big urban centers. Wouldn't it be nicer if we lived somewhere more affordable, somewhere a little bit more remote? And small towns have a bit of an opportunity then to capitalize on that trend. And as we move past the pandemic, it's highly unlikely that things are going to go back to usual. I think a lot of these trends are probably going to stick in place. Certainly, once the dust settles, a lot of the businesses that have had to close or have faced the challenges through the pandemic, they won't necessarily be reopening. But some of those opportunities still exist. Communities still have a chance to attract people. But to do so, they're going to need to take a new approach, because we are going to be left with new service gaps, potentially, as businesses have had to close. And it's likely that governments won't be able to offer too much support. Although it's hard to say what's going to happen, it's likely that the spending that we've accumulated over the past year or so is going to be offset in the next while through a bit of a period of austerity. So in many cases, communities are going to have to look within for the resources and the solutions that they'll need to fill those service gaps and help make their communities more attractive. And they need to do that if they want to capitalize on this appreciation for local, this appreciation for small towns, and attract people. One of my colleagues that works in Manitoba said, to get others to invest in us, we're first going to need to invest in ourselves. And that's kind of the idea behind this campaign that we've currently launched at Co-operatives First, called Hometown Advantage. Because small towns have a track record of using their ingenuity to remain vibrant. And communities really need to reflect on what makes their communities great and what new ideas they can put to work. That's what our Hometown Advantage is all about. It starts a conversation among small towns to learn from one another and talk about the advantages of small town life and how we can help them thrive. And if we look around Alberta's small towns, we can see lots of great examples of resilience and ingenuity put to work. And let's talk a little bit about some of those right now. So I mentioned off the hop that Alberta's always had this resilient streak. And for Cooperatives First, when we look at this, we see an absolutely fundamental role of cooperatives. People in Alberta have been working together for years to ensure that their communities have the services they need, have the infrastructure they need. And there's many cool examples of that. If we look around Alberta, we see lots of co-ops providing kind of that baseline of services. We've got the Rural Electrification Associations, which have, ever since 1950, been powering rural areas. Currently, there's 32 in operation. And at Cooperatives First, we had the privilege of visiting the Battle River Power Association or Power Cooperative to learn more about the work that they do and how they operate as a member-owned organization. If we look across Alberta, we see over 170 rural water co-ops throughout the province that are delivering water to farmers and ranchers so that they can access water in their homes and for their livestock, often operating in remote areas. In the absence of a government or a big business, people need to work together to access the infrastructure, the goods and the services that they need. And a cooperative is just perfectly the way to do that. And if we look, I think just south of you guys, Clark, just south of the Camrose area in the Battle River Rail area, when CN Rail was looking at discontinuing the short line operations from Alliance up to Camrose, farmers in the area just weren't having it. So they rallied local farmers together with support from local investors, and they purchased the short line rail and rail cars to ensure that they could keep that service in their community so that they could better support grain farmers in the area and retain that important piece of local infrastructure. And these are just some of the areas where Alberta's small towns really have a fantastic history of coming together, working together to ensure they can access the goods, the services, and the infrastructure that they need. And one group I'd really like to dig into a little bit more is Westlock Terminals. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Westlock, but it's a town of about 5,000 people just north of Edmonton. And unlike many parts of the province, it's a very agricultural community. I believe there's hundreds of grain farms throughout the county. And in the early 2000s, when Agricare was hoping to consolidate operations in Edmonton, they were going to abandon Westlock County. They didn't want to sell the grain terminal. They were just going to close it down, and all the grain farmers in the area were going to have to figure it out. This didn't sit well with any of the grain producers, and it didn't sit well with many of the business owners that worked in Westlock that wanted the rail access to continue in their community that they were likely going to lose if the terminal shut down. So they filed a complaint with the Competition Bureau and were given 12 months to find a buyer. And in that 12 months, local producers working with local ECDEV and government found, I think, 2 possible buyers that were interested in investing in the terminal and continuing the services. But in both cases, it fell through. And eventually, local farmers, local business owners realized that, well, if we want to keep this terminal running, we want to keep this infrastructure, we want to keep this service going in our community, enjoying the benefits of it, we're going to need to take this on ourselves. So they pounded the pavement, they got the word out there, they managed to bring together, I believe, over 200 local farmers and local business owners to invest in Westlock Terminals. And in just 6 weeks, they raised $1.2 million to purchase the terminals from Agricare. They were then able to leverage a operating loan of $600,000 from ATB Financial. And without stopping production at all, they were able to continue on into the next growing season. And within year 1, they were able to return a 7% dividend to those that invested. Because again, this was a profitable terminal. Agricare just wanted to shut it down and consolidate in Edmonton. But it took folks realizing that no one else is going to do this for us. If we want this service in our community, we want to make our community a better place, we're the ones that are going to need to step up. Like my colleague said, if we're not willing to invest in ourselves, why would anybody else? And this is kind of the mindset and the approach that we're going to need as we move forward. Communities need to leverage that hometown advantage and change their approach to how they access services. They're really the ones that need to lead the charge, put in the work, if they want to realize those benefits and capitalize on some of the opportunities that we've got coming out of the pandemic. So there's really three big areas, very broad areas, where communities could draw on some of this logic, take on this new approach, and maybe form a cooperative to access some of the services they need, to remove those barriers to accessing capital so that they can better support entrepreneurs and access funds to pay for some of these projects, and how they might identify new opportunities to either add value to products, be more competitive, create jobs, and overall just create new opportunities in their communities. So I'll provide some examples of groups that we're aware of or that we've worked with that are right in the thick of this, and what they've learned and how they've kind of harnessed this new approach to providing new services and creating new cooperatives to help their communities. So the first one is Smoky Lake, about an hour and a half northeast of Edmonton, a small town of about, I think, 1,200 people. And for years, they just didn't have a daycare. There were no options for childcare locally. There were a couple of day homes, but for the most part, parents just had to swap babysitting duties. You'll take my kids on Monday, I'll take yours on Tuesday and Wednesday, and people just made it work. But this wasn't really convenient, and it highly limited employment options for two-parent households. So eventually, folks in the community simply asked, why not just start a daycare ourselves? And that's exactly what they did. They started the very first daycare cooperative in Alberta. They were able to make use of some unused rooms in the local school, which was a real win-win situation because the school was, getting smaller in terms of the student population. So being able to put those rooms to use was a big benefit for the school as well. And today, the Smoky Lake Daycare Cooperative, more affectionately known as the Pumpkin Patch, is a parent-run facility, and it provides services to 42 children that use their daycare services as well as the after-school program. It's an absolutely huge success. When I ran into their economic development officer, she let me know that they've actually seen a little bit of a spike in the community's population because it's one of the only communities in the area with a daycare facility, and it just provides those opportunities. It has ripple effects throughout the community. If you've got good childcare, both parents can go to work. And for families that are looking for a place to settle down, this is a really big factor in their considerations. So they didn't wait for someone else to provide this service for them. In Smoky Lake, they needed the daycare, so they built it themselves. One of the big challenges that we see in the communities we work with is, where are the funds going to come from to pay for these projects? And that was exactly the question in Sangudo. I don't know if folks are familiar with Sangudo, but it's about an hour and change northwest of Edmonton. And their story was, I think, very similar to many small towns. They saw an ever shrinking small population. They saw businesses closing. They saw large companies leaving their community. Bit of a bleak situation, but some of this really came to a head when their local meat processing facility was facing closure. The local business owner there was hoping to retire, couldn't find a buyer for his business, was just going to close up shop and retire in Edmonton. And for a community that's in the heart of cattle country, losing that meat processing facility is a big loss for the community. And there were two local entrepreneurs that wanted to invest in the community. They wanted to plant roots and run this facility, but they just couldn't get the financial backing to do it. They were, I think, a little bit younger than I am, but wanted to take on being business owners. So a number of people in the community started talking. They started having conversations about how can we support these guys? How can we support our community more broadly? Is there a new approach that we can put to work to make things work? Because one thing's certainly true for many of the small towns in Alberta and all across Canada is there's often lots of wealth in those communities. Certainly for farmers, for retired farmers, there's lots of wealth. It's just maybe not put to work in the communities. Many folks have monies tied up in RRSPs, retirement savings, TFSAs, and it's doing important economic development work somewhere else. It's tied up in the New York and the Toronto stock exchanges. So the thinking in Sangudo was, why don't we just take some of that money that's doing work somewhere else and just reinvest it here at home, where we can see the benefits of it and it can help our community access some of these new services. And that's exactly what they did. Just 32 of them off the start invested, I think, upwards of $5,000 to $50,000 each, depending on how comfortable they were coming in with money. And that gave them a pool of cash that they could make flexible investments with. So those two entrepreneurs that wanted to purchase the meat processing facility, they were able to partner with the Sangudo Opportunity Development Cooperative and buy the assets from the retiring business owner so that the 12 jobs that that business provided and the service that it provided for local producers in the area could continue uninterrupted. With that first win under their belt, they looked around their community and thought, what else could we do? Well, there's not a great place for coffee, so they renovated the local Legion and partnered with another entrepreneur that would run that business. They took a look around and realized that there weren't great options for family housing in the community. So they built 2 new houses to attract young families to move back into the region. And of course, they were doing this to help make their community a better, vibrant place. They were really leveraging their hometown advantage, but they also saw the financial gains from this type of cooperative. Since it was created, they saw returns on investment between 2 and 12%. And I don't know about you guys, but it's hard to see those sorts of returns from just tucking in a GIC or a TFSA. So not only are they seeing a return on that investment, but they're helping make their community a better place. Again, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, why would anybody else? And they're really putting that to work in Sangudo. And finally, we need a new approach when it comes to creating new jobs and new opportunities. And 2 of the groups that we've worked with these past 2 years really embody that mindset. In Westlock, Alberta, just outside of Smoky Lake, there's a group of producers that are just frustrated with making a go of it, creating local produce. They've got to compete with those big boxes like HelloFresh, or they've got to try and make the trek into Edmonton to set up shop at the farmers markets. And it's just a hard business to make a go of it in as a local producer. So they said, why don't we try something different? Why don't we work together, leverage the value that we can draw on as producers by working together and create a local store, a local bistro. Let's take the products that we produce, put them into a cooperative, add some value, and capture some of the traffic that passes through the community every day from Edmonton to Fort McMurray. And while they were doing it, they created a community hub in the process. The pandemic slowed down their progress a little bit, but we're hoping to visit that business once it's up and running in the next little bit here. But if you check them out on Facebook, they're very active in getting that local produce, those local products out to customers. Another co-op that's changing, creating opportunities for their members, is the Blooming Ladies Cooperative. And this is a co-op currently made of women that's located in Calgary, Edmonton. I think there's some in Ontario, but they're all over the place. They really they were really wrestling with the question of how can women participate more fully in the workforce while working from home. This is a huge question that we've got, as well, most of us are working from home. How can we make a go of it? And if small towns are hoping to attract remote workers, this is the kind of opportunity that really aligns with that. So the Blooming Ladies Cooperative thought, well, let's build a database. Let's build an online site that allows our members, who are professionals, coaches, virtual assistants, instructors, consultants, let's build a database that allows them to connect with clients globally. If we don't need to be in the same office building or the same city or even the same province as some of the clients that we're working with, why not rethink work more broadly? And that's exactly what they did. So they're currently growing. They're currently crowdfunding to help build their platform, and they're really just rethinking how we do work. And these are some of the ideas that small towns and small town thinkers are putting to work to capture opportunity, to help live and stay and grow and thrive in the communities where they're living, that other communities can definitely learn from and put to work to help their small towns thrive. And all of this is really just kind of old solutions, because Alberta's communities have always been doing this sort of thing. We've always been working together to access the goods, the services, the infrastructure, create the jobs that we need to help our communities survive, grow, and thrive. Now we just need to put it to work in new sectors, new businesses, to meet the challenges that we're facing today. I think a lot of the communities and a lot of the barriers that we see to creating cooperatives is that in many cases, folks are comfortable having other people provide goods and services for them. Whether it's a big business or governments, we're okay if somebody else creates those jobs or creates those opportunities. But with the challenges we're facing now, particularly in small towns, it's likely that those opportunities might go away. And it's possible that other folks might not come in and provide those services for us. So we need to look within to create those services, create those opportunities, and provide those services for ourselves. And when we went to Westlock to take a tour of Westlock Terminals, we also had a chance to speak with the mayor of Westlock, who said, I think Albertans are entrepreneurial. And if you want to make your community a better place, you need to get up off your backside and make it happen. And isn't that the essence of a cooperative? And that's exactly the case. In most of the communities where we're working, in most of the communities that are starting these new cooperatives, people are just not waiting for someone else to come in and provide this service for them. They're taking a new approach. They're identifying what the challenge is in their community, and they're figuring out how they can work together to overcome that challenge or create new opportunities, to provide new services, to access new sources of capital, to create jobs and find ways to add value. And as a result, they're really well placed to capitalize on some of the opportunities that we see coming out of the pandemic, and adapt to those challenges now, but also the challenges to come. And certainly, you don't need to do any of this by yourself. We've talked a little bit about some communities and some groups that have tried really cool ways of new approaches to some of these old problems. But by all means, if folks are interested in pursuing a new cooperative or interested in learning more about co-ops, by all means, we're here to help. Although we're located in Saskatoon, we do work all across Western Canada. And of course, these days, most of our work is on Zoom. But we work with groups in a variety of ways. Through hands-on support with helping incorporate their cooperative, training the boards of cooperatives, as well as helping out with business planning and feasibility studies. Our organization currently offers 3 online courses for groups that are interested in learning more about the co-ops in Canada, how to start a cooperative, or governance in cooperatives. And we've also just launched a Hometown Advantage webinar series. And after I stop sharing my screen, I'll share a link through the chat so you guys can check out that series. But it's a way to start a conversation and again, learn from what other communities are doing. What are economic development professionals working on other parts of Canada or Alberta? And what learnings could you maybe take from that? And we also offer a 3 Good Ideas newsletter where folks can, again, receive some content from us and join a conversation with other economic developers, community leaders to have a discussion about their hometown advantage, have a talk about small towns, economic development generally, and how cooperatives might be a good fit for your community to capitalize on some of those opportunities. Well, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Clark, I really appreciate the invite today. But if anybody wants to follow up, I think we've got lots of time for questions. But if folks want to follow up after the work or the webinar, by all means, please feel free to send me an email, give us a call, or please do check out our online resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I'm assuming you can hear me, Kyle. I don't know if you can see my face. Yeah, okay, well, Kyle can hear me even if you don't see my face, that's fine. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A, and I would encourage anybody else with a question to submit it now. We do have some time. The first question, there are actually a few different questions that kind of speak to this general idea, and I'll admit it's a hard question, maybe the hardest when it comes to this topic. Oftentimes, in many communities, we see groups, small groups of dedicated individuals who get super excited about the co-op idea. They're in. They do all the groundwork. They set up the legal framework of the cooperative. They go public, trying to get people to be excited about it, and then it hits a wall. They don't find the necessary funding that they were hoping to find, and it ends up falling flat. Like you talked about the success stories, but surely there are even more stories where people, again, these small groups of people get excited about it, and then it doesn't turn out in the end. I wonder what kind of advice you would give to those groups starting out trying to do this and running into that wall of apathy or disinterest or whatever that prevents it from really getting off the ground.
Absolutely. That's definitely a hard question. Very good question, though. And I think I mentioned that we've worked with about 150 groups, maybe 50 of them have started new co-ops. So without a doubt, most ventures like this sometimes have a failure to launch. I would say with what we've seen, there's always a couple of factors that you need to have a successful startup. And if you're starting a cooperative, without a doubt, the most essential thing you need is people. Not only do you need at least 3 people to start a cooperative, but without having a foundation of support, it's just not going to get off the ground. So whenever groups come to us hoping to get some support or some advice, our first question is always, do you have the people? So for example, if you're starting, I don't know, a consumer-owned cooperative that provides, I don't know, widgets, do you have at least 5, 6, 10 people that are ready and willing to invest some money so they can buy some widgets? If the answer is no, you need to do some work. But I think once groups have at least a group of people that are willing to put in some of this work, they need to do some of this pre-planning stuff. And we can certainly help with this. We can certainly pose some of those questions and provide some tools that folks can work through some of these processes. But you need to be able to test your market a little bit. So conducting a bit of a pre-feasibility analysis. What does our market look like? What's the appetite for buying this? Where's our nearest competitor? Asking some of those questions that you'd ask starting any business. And honestly, go talk to people. If there's a coffee row in your town, just go have conversations with folks. Say, you know, we're hoping to do this. We're hoping to build this widget store. Is this something you're interested in? Would you shop here? Get as prepared as you possibly can. And of course, you know, things like timing and other external factors are always going to be a factor in this sort of thing. But if you're as prepared as you possibly can be, you've got your foundation of support, you've maybe identified some sources of funding, which again, we can help figure out what the capital structure of a new co-op looks like. If you can get as planned as you possibly can be, you'll be much, much better off to respond to any of those other challenges that might crop up.
All right, great. I'm going to go to the Q&A board here. We've got a really good question. The rural utility co-ops are great examples for co-ops in Alberta. What are your thoughts on why the utility co-op model hasn't evolved to provide high-speed internet and other critical telecommunication infrastructure here in Alberta?
That's a fantastic question. I'm really glad somebody asked that. When I give talks kind of like this, one of the other examples I do use is actually from Manitoba. So if folks are interested in starting a broadband co-op, just give a quick Google of Hamiota broadband co-op. It's located in, I mean, it's a very small town in Manitoba, maybe 2,000 people in the rural municipality. And they did exactly that. I think the reason we don't see more of them is because broadband's really expensive. I think the total project cost that this community faced was millions of dollars. But at the end of the day, they just took a look at the numbers. They figured out how many people they would need to sign up to pay for the borrowing that needed to take place to finance the installation of the broadband. And if they got, I think, 70% of the total population, they could make it work. And that's exactly what they did. I think they ended up with 95% at the end of the day. And they actually have broadband that is 3 times as fast as what I have here in Saskatoon. So I'm not sure that any of the existing utility co-ops have really thought about it. But I mean, those are member-owned organizations. So certainly if you're a member of an REA or another utility co-op, why not bring that to your board or bring that up at your next members meeting? It might be something that they'd be interested in pursuing and expanding the services that they offer. Or if you're, you know, in a small town and you want better access to internet, certainly if you're hoping to attract remote workers, that would be a huge selling feature. Why not start that conversation locally, figure out if you could partner with an ISP or look into the costs of setting up broadband. And then it's a matter of doing some good business planning to see what the business model looks like to actually make it work. But really, it's starting the conversation and trying to make a go of it.
Great. I'm super happy someone asked that question as well. We all know, you know, in rural areas that, you know, internet is, the big wall we tend to be running into in most rural areas, not all, but most. And of course, the pandemic has just shone, you know, such a light on that problem. But there is a potential solution there. It's not easy. It's going to take a lot of work and committed people, but there is a potential solution there, other than waiting for, you know, Elon Musk to beam in some internet from Mars or whatever he has planned. Let's see here. I'm not going to read that one. It's a bit of a joke. But there are a few others here. We do have, I know on this call, we have a number of representatives from municipalities across rural Alberta. So they're not necessarily the ones with the, well, maybe they are entrepreneurial at heart, but their day job isn't trying to create a co-op. They're more interested in how they can support, you know, those entrepreneurs in town who want to start a co-op. So what would you tell a municipality who is interested in trying to be supportive of this model of business in their region?
That's a great question. Certainly case specific, I would say, because we certainly work with rural municipal leaders, Indigenous community leaders, and there's definitely different things that you can do there. But I would say a lot of our projects are actually kicked off through conversations with economic development professionals. So your local EDOs, your CAO, or the local community futures office. I mean, those folks are certainly, very much in touch with what's happening on the ground in their communities, including with entrepreneurs. Certainly empowering those individuals to keep having those conversations, getting out and talking with entrepreneurs, and then, certainly attending ECDEV conferences. I know EDA, Economic Developers Alberta, is a fantastic opportunity for learning and exchange of ideas. So helping municipal staff do that is a really fantastic way for helping start some of these conversations. And once there's a project actually in place, there's heaps of things that municipalities or local governments can do to help support that project and help it with momentum. I know certainly in some communities, in Brandon, Manitoba, for example, there was a group of, I think, 60 seniors that wanted to build a housing co-op. They had no housing living in their community, so they needed a housing co-op. They actually partnered with the local government to get favorable property tax arrangements, some help towards the cost of the building, and then they could partner with the community, with the municipality of Brandon, to have some affordable rentals in that community, which will help the municipality as well. So certainly, I mean, things that municipalities can do every day with property tax arrangements, infrastructure arrangements. In some cases, we've seen municipalities or government-owned agencies come in with donations or contributions towards a project. And in some Indigenous communities, we actually see the chief and council or the local government making even bigger contributions towards a project if it's something that their community needs and they want to help make a go of it. So really a diverse set of things that you could do once it's up and running, but really just encouraging folks to have those conversations, maybe even providing some help with staff to help start those conversations.
All right, I'm going to throw another one at you. Are housing co-ops having a resurgence? I was on a call yesterday with an affordable housing lab and people kept referring to them as a thing of the 70s. Smoke started coming out of my ears. So what do you think about housing co-ops?
That's a good question. I think that's something that is said a lot because I don't want to say that. I'll make it fact checked on that one. But I want to say most of Canada's cooperatives, certainly the ones that we see on the prairies, were built in the 70s and the 80s, mostly because that's when there was a huge stock of federal government funds to help build new affordable housing, many of which were housing co-ops. Yes, I do think we are going to see a resurgence of housing co-ops, maybe in a couple of different ways. Certainly, we've got the federal government paying a lot more interest in housing, and there's money that's attached to that. And by all means, if folks are interested in starting a housing co-op, whether it's for seniors or more affordable housing, give us a call because now is definitely a good time to pursue that because, yeah, there is money available for it. I think we've always seen more and more and more housing co-ops throughout the years. They've often, though, been concentrated in Vancouver and Toronto and Quebec. Quebec's always a very special case because the provincial government there does have a lot of institutionalized support for cooperatives specifically. So we've always seen lots of new co-ops, especially housing co-ops popping up there. But certainly in Vancouver and Toronto, where access to affordable housing is almost impossible, we've always seen lots of groups coalesce around the idea of an alternative form of renting and an alternative form of home ownership. And so we've always seen lots of new housing co-ops emerge there. The other area, though, where I think we're seeing a real resurgence of housing co-ops, and this has actually affected some of our work already, is around seniors housing. because many, many small towns across Western Canada are not prepared for essentially the baby boomer generation retiring. They just don't have the services. And of course, many of those people don't want to abandon their hometowns. They want to stay where they're living. They want to age in place. So in many cases, they're either creating new housing cooperatives that are kind of like seniors apartments. Great examples in Brandon, Manitoba, Thompson, Manitoba. Or they're creating more community owned co-ops that are providing advanced levels of care. There's a great example in, what's the name of the community? It's in southern Saskatchewan, but we're working with a couple as well that are doing really fantastic work, providing more longer term care using the cooperative model. So again, there's lots of solutions around the housing front where cooperatives are a great fit.
That's great. I'm going to lob one more at you, and I do say lob because I'm going to let you talk about really anything you want in this last question. You did a great job speaking to a number of examples, successful examples in Alberta, and I appreciate that. We're in Alberta. That makes the most sense. And in the Q&A, you've had a chance to ask a few other questions or raise a few other kind of examples of successful cooperatives that were outside Alberta. Is there one particular favorite success story, in terms of co-ops and rural economic development that really gets you excited that we haven't touched on today?
I would be really hard pressed to choose a favorite one. I would say, without doubt, two of the ones that I use all the time in my work are Sangudo and Westlock Terminals. And if anyone's looking to learn a little bit more about them, just check out our site. We've actually got some fantastic videos from when we got to visit both Sangudo and Westlock Terminals. Great examples there. I've had the privilege of working all over Western Canada in all sorts of different places, from Fraser Lake, BC to the Arm of Piney in Manitoba. There's heaps of different groups that are hard at work trying to start new cooperatives. It'd be really hard to pick one, but if I'll say Sangudo or Westlock because I point to them maybe more than many others, because just an absolutely fantastic story of resolve and the ability of a community to come together around an idea that's just outside the box. So maybe those two as well I'll go with. All
right, great. Fair enough. I'll let you off on that one. Thank you so much, Kyle, for taking the time to be with us today. Cooperatives as a tool for economic and community development in rural communities is an idea that I think we here at the ACSRC are getting excited about. We're planning to do some work in this area as well over the next year. For those of you who have additional questions or want to reach out to Kyle, I would encourage you to do so, and I think he would as well. Kate, if you want to throw up our last slide, just want to, before I let you all go, just remind you that this again was just one of in a series of webinars that we are hosting at the ACSRC. We have a couple more in this series coming up, one on local renewable energy, essentially wind energy in rural Alberta and its place in economic development going forward, and another on the challenge of social cohesion, something that I think ties into the the problem of trying to get co-ops off the ground and getting as many people as you can excited about the idea. So a couple more to look forward to. Definitely go to our website, acsrc.ca, and you'll find a link to register for those webinars and find out more information. While you're there, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media, and you'll be up to date on the variety of different outreach and research projects that we are planning over the next year and a bit. Thank you again for tuning in, and I hope to see you again. Have a wonderful day.